Morning.
Good morning.
So it is 9 o'clock, and I see Mr. Langwell here, and I see Ms. Najee here, is that and others, of course. Thank you, everybody. Let's get started. Today's date is March 24th, 2022. We are here on an appeal from the Landmarks and Urban Conservation Commission. My name is Stephen Chavez. I'm the Land Use Hearing Officer for the City of Albuquerque. And we are here in the matter of appeal number AC-22-4. 4. My apologies. Mr. Langwell, are you going to be presenting on your behalf?
I am. Good morning, Mr. Chavez.
Good morning.
And City Council.
Let me swear you in, okay? Can you please raise your right hand? Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and only the truth under penalty of perjury, sir?
I do.
Okay, good. Let me remind you, I do have the 6 photographs that you sent earlier in the week. So those I will include into the record because they essentially depict what's already in the record, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so there's no dispute that they should be included in the record. Let's begin now. Is there any preliminary issues that we need to cover before we begin?
Not for me.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I think my reason for this appeal, and as you can see by the pictures, all I'm trying to say is that there is a solution to make this patio so it's acceptable to match the character of this building. In my pictures I've included, there's pictures of 2 portals that are on this building. The front portal, which is to the south, I believe is original to the building. I'm not sure. I've looked at pictures from way back in the day, and I see that in the pictures, where the portal is covered with a latia structure, basically very small logs. And the back portal that was added, I don't know when it was added, 2-3 years ago, that also matches that front portal cover. It's got latias on the portal cover for the door. It has latias that it acts as a fence for the patio up on the 2nd story. So it's our intention that this patio that I've added, I can put latias on that and it will match the character of the building. The Landmark Committee said that we're obscuring the historic details of this patio that existed, where the corbels and vigas, and you can see in my photos that the corbels and vigas are not obscured. They are if you're in the street, then you can't see them, but if you're on the sidewalk, you can see the corbels and vigas are still there. And they didn't like the fact that we used a plastic material, and I suggested that we're going to paint that brown to match the rest of the structure underneath that patio cover. So you won't be able to tell there's any difference between it. So
when you started speaking about this, I was excited because I thought you were referring to alternatives to what exists currently. Apparently, you're just describing what exists currently as an alternative.
It doesn't exist currently. There's one of those photos says current view, and basically the current view of that is there's just a white cover on there.
I see. Okay, so that's the current state.
That's the current state.
And you want to add the latias to match the adjoining building.
I do. The whole intention of this is to keep that patio cover because I need to have protection for my customers.
Right.
If I remove that my customers are out in the elements.
Okay. I was hoping that you were going to say, because Chairperson Rosie Dudley, I think, in the record, asked you about alternatives, and she specifically referred to raising the entire structure to be on top of the existing patio, or to be at the exact level with the existing patio structure, so that those corbels are clearly seen from even the street. Which
that's an option as well.
Let me finish. Which you apparently admit is obstructed from the street.
From the street from the street, yes, it is.
Okay, so I mean, are you willing to raise it to the level of the existing patio?
We could do that as well. That's not a problem at all.
Okay. Are you finished, sir?
I believe I am.
Okay, and you do have some rebuttal time. I'm going to allow for Ms. Najee to go over the record for me, and then you can ask her questions in cross-examination if you think that's necessary. Okay?
Very good.
Okay. Ms. Najee, good morning. I can't hear you.
Yes, good morning, sorry.
That's okay. Can you raise your right hand and let me swear you in? Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and only the truth under penalty of perjury, ma'am?
I do.
Okay, go right ahead.
This case, when we presented it, as you can see, a lot of construction was done without the certificate of appropriateness. The applicant has made the corrections to the signage, which we were very glad to see that the signage has been reduced. And our issue with the Latia covering on this porch, as you mentioned, was because it does block the historic detailing of this building, which was a residential property. If I can do you want me, or can I share the just a couple of images of it, just as so we can reference it?
Sure. Are they already in the record?
Yes, they were part of the initial record.
That there is no problem with doing that. If you have the technology.
If
Moya?
will just approve me, then I will do that.
Okay. Mr. Moya, are you there? Are you running this meeting?
Well, if not, it's not a big issue with it.
You can refer to the record, and I can pull it up on my own. And I'm sure Mr. Langwell has a copy of that as well.
Yes. Let me just find the record. I will say, just from one of the photographs that was sent in, the Latia rail on the second floor balcony that Mr. Langwell sent is not been approved. It was approved for an open wooden or metal rail that was put up, and it is not appropriate and has not been approved. The little overhangs have been approved. They were not part of the little one to the south, which is in the front. It's not original to the house. That whole part was an addition. And therefore, we did allow it to the back property, at the back of the property when that renovation was done, because it is small. It's a small overhang. The idea of large Latia porches, Latias are usually used for ceilings, not for roofs. So it's, we kind of let it go with those small little overhangs, but the idea of this large Latia covered shade structure that's in front of the original detailing does not meet with the appropriateness of that property. At the time of the hearing, Mr. Langwell was very sort of like, yeah, whatever, we'll do whatever, we can change this or change that. And he seemed to be in agreement with what we were talking about. But then we have the appeal here. So we feel like it's not adding a lot of, there's a large outside patio area to the back of the building to serve the clientele. It's a very small little open area there in the front that doesn't add that much more to it. But as was mentioned, there was discussion about putting the raised porch or shade structure that would be above the existing historic thing that would require a reapplication for that design for certificate of appropriateness minor. It wouldn't have to go back to the commission if that is what Mr. Langwell wants to pursue, but we feel as though the current design does block the historic character of the building, which is a very simple building. So these small design details that are there are important to expressing the history and the architecture of Old Town. And that's my only, that's, I stand for any questions.
I have a few questions, and then I'll allow Mr. Langwell to ask you questions if he so chooses. With regard to the design guidelines that were applied in this case, were the 1998 guidelines applied, or were the more recent, newly adopted ones applied? Because the reason why I ask is because in your analysis, it looks like you applied the more recent adopted guidelines.
We go back to when we actually go through when we're analyzing these sorts of things that are not covered within the IDO portion of the guidelines, which, as you know, deals more with display and signage. We go back to the general guidelines, which are talking about, which come back from the original ordinance, which had stated being historically appropriate. We pull out some guidelines that are used generally across all the districts, and they have been incorporated more, but because of the nature of when we're talking about what would have been there in 1998 for Old Town is talking about historically appropriate at the time of, in terms of the registration documents, the nomination documents, which are very broad. Okay, so we pull in things that are explain what we are talking about with those.
So I guess that didn't really answer my question. Perhaps you did and I didn't understand, but I'll be more specific with my question. In your staff report, specifically on page 39 of your staff report, you referred to a policy. It's boxed in, and it's for porches. And in that policy, there's a porch policy that's restated, describing porches and replacing porches and the details regarding that policy. That policy I found in the newly adopted guidelines, but I didn't find that policy in the 1998 guideline. And so that's why I raised the question. Did you apply the 1998 historic design guidelines for HPO5, or did you apply the newly adopted HPO5 design guidelines?
The way I would explain this is that the 1998 guidelines, going back to the ordinance for the Landmarks Commission, and it should have been transferred over, which was certainly there in 1998, was talking about the determination for a certificate of appropriateness is talking about historic appropriateness for property. In the Old Town district, we didn't have them written out specifically where we are talking about porches and foundations and windows. At the same time, that information is still encompassed within that sense of historic appropriateness. So we put those guidelines in, and we're expanding this written document for clarity, but it doesn't really change what is the authority to utilize for evaluating properties, because these aren't, like the zoning issues, which has to do with the signage and the number of signs and the size of the signs, but it has to do with determining its historic appropriateness. Now, previously, there wasn't a lot that was set out that people could look at and say, this is what we're talking about. And I did incorporate that information that we use across historic districts within the city for the purpose of clarification. But it is.
I'm sorry, let me interrupt you. Where does that policy come from then, regarding porches on page 39? I just want to know where it comes from.
Well, it comes from the general historic guidelines that we have throughout the city. It's not specifically and within the Old Town one.
Give me a citation for those for that policy.
Landmarks Commission rulings do not have citations for them. The guidelines that are determined for, we have within the IDO, we have the authority to create guidelines for districts.
Well, where are those guidelines written? I mean, are they unwritten guidelines? Is that what you're telling me? I'm just trying to understand where these policies are written, because if they're not written anywhere, I have a fundamental problem with you using unwritten policies. That's just not fair. They have to be written somewhere. And so if you can give me the citation for where they are written, then I can assess whether or not you've correctly applied them. I can't assess unwritten policies. I just don't know how to do that.
Okay, let me try to
Now, I saw that policy, just to be fair, I saw that policy regarding porches in the updated HPO5 design guidelines. So that's why I asked the question originally, if you applied those guidelines. And I'm just trying to understand how those guidelines are applicable. That would be my second question, but I need to find out whether or not you applied them.
Well, I think in the sense that we applied those, yes, but it's not because they didn't exist in essence prior to this. I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull up what I'm utilizing. Our computers, I don't know about yours on your end, ours are very slow today. I'm still waiting for the, just to try and get the IDO up. So because of the nature of Old Town, we had very broad explanations. I mean, you can take those guidelines out in terms of those policies, and just, I'm not getting anything now. Sorry, saying that it's saying that my access is not allowed.
So maybe I can ask it this way. So apparently these are undated guidelines, but I tracked them down, and it looks like they were adopted by the historic, I'm sorry, by the Landmarks Commission, apparently somewhere around Christmas time or thereafter, just shortly thereafter, maybe November, between November and January, they were adopted by the Landmarks Commission. I saw a staff report from November 10th, 2021, that essentially recommends the adoption of these new guidelines. So apparently they were adopted. So now when I go to those design guidelines, and they're termed the Historic Old Town Development Standards and Guidelines. Now they are undated, but I went through these guidelines, and these guidelines specifically include the exact policy language that you put in your staff report regarding porches. And so I'm assuming you used these guidelines in this case. Is that correct?
It is correct.
Okay. Well, so then that's a written policy. Now, my next question is are these policies, are these guidelines applicable to this case? Because in a previous case that we just had last week, I saw that the city attorney's office indicated that these guidelines are not applicable in that case, which was fairly recent in time to this case, as to enforcement. And so I'm wondering why the landmarks, and I'm not trying to set you up, I'm just trying to understand whether or not the Landmarks Commission dealt with this case differently than the previous case, regarding the murals and the other, the railing, the patio railing, whether or not the city attorney's office made a recommendation that these new guidelines are inapplicable in Mr. Langwell's case, just as they were inapplicable in the previous case. And if not, that's okay too. I'm just trying to understand the history there and why there's apparently a distinction that was used by the LC that's not in the record.
Well,
does that make sense?
It does. And these guidelines, they were not approved, and hence they're not in their current written form. They were approved in February. Was that? I believe they were approved in February. So they were not incorporated in this any more than the murals restriction, but it's based in, like, if I look at the review and decision criteria, which is 65B3B within the IDO, which is the architectural character, historic value, or archaeological value of the structure or site itself, or of any HPO zone in which it is located, will not be significantly impaired or diminished. When we go with just that, which because of the delay in getting the expanded ordinance or guideline for Old Town. Okay, we have utilized previous or other approved guidelines that are used in the other historic districts within the city for explaining what that means. Okay, so from it is the Landmarks Commission's belief that the IDO language that I just read means that we can review these things, and we can say that this porch or this latia that's blocking the view of the thing does impair significantly the property or the district.
Okay. I'm not trying to debate with you about that. I don't disagree with you. What I'm trying to understand is why you use that policy language for
clarity. It was really for clarity.
Okay.
If you want to remove that from the record in terms of the analysis, we still hold with just going with the verbiage of the IDO itself.
Okay.
It was just put in there for clarity.
Okay, got it. Now, my next question is, when were the changes to the porch made? It wasn't really clear in the record when Mr. Langwell created or erected that wrought iron structure that holds the plastic, the greenhouse plastic type stuff on top. Do you know when that was erected? Do you have any evidence regarding that?
Mr. Langwell, could you provide a date for that?
Mr. Langwell can answer that. He can answer that a little later. If you don't know, please let me know, and then I can.
I would have to go back. I know it was that we had received calls early in 2021, and I'd gone out there to look once, and I didn't see what they were talking about, and then I went out another time, and I did see what they were talking about, but it was several months before the application was submitted.
I see. Okay. That kind of pins it down for me. Good. So is the building a contributing structure or is it a non-contributing structure?
Old Town is a unique issue. We will say contributing. I will say it is contributing.
Okay. Thank you. So that Mr. Langwell's rented, the building that he leases is a contributing building, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure because it's not in the record and it wasn't in your staff report, and I wanted to make sure. Okay, good. That does answer my questions. Mr. Langwell, do you have any cross-examination questions for Ms. Najee? And just questions at this. Hold on. I don't want you to make an argument to me at this time. I'm just asking you if you have questions for Ms. Najee regarding her testimony.
The only question I have is your newest guidelines that the Landmark Commission wrote. Is that been included in part of the IDO? Has it been accepted in the IDO?
It doesn't. The particular guidelines for historic districts or for the HPOs are determined and finalized at the Landmarks Commission. They do not go to City Council, and they are not part of the IDO. The IDO references that the Landmarks Commission creates those guidelines, and that that we follow those guidelines in terms of appropriateness and determining the appropriateness of applications.
Mr. Langwell, any other questions?
No.
Okay, thank you. Now, this is your opportunity, Mr. Langwell, to make an argument, a closing argument, if you will. Take as long as you need. Okay?
Yeah, closing argument, it's pretty easy. So I actually assembled this patio in May of 2021. And when I went to search for guidelines that told me what I could assemble, I didn't find any. Pretty much like you're alluding to here a minute ago, Mr. Chavez.
That's not what I alluded to.
Okay, all right.
Because there are guidelines that are applicable and that are clearly published in the IDO. It's through a link in the IDO, and they're on the city's website. So there are guidelines that are applicable.
Okay, and I'm also curious as why standards are applied differently to this case than were applied to the other case you guys dealt with last week. I'd like that to be answered. I did put up this patio in May of 2021. Of the wrought iron work, most of it was original. The the archway, I'm going to call it an arch, it's not an arch. The archway structure that has the sign Lessman on there, which is original to the building. So that was not added. That was already there. The only thing I did is I had bracing and put a sheet up there. That's all.
Okay. Are you finished, sir?
I am.
Okay, great. Thank you. Is there anybody else? This is a very short land use hearing. Thank you so much. Miss Bolivar, I see that you are there. Is there anything that you'd like to add? I don't think you worked on this case, but if you would like to add anything, you certainly can.
No, I have nothing to add.
If you have something to add, if not, I don't need to swear you in.
No.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, thank you, Mr. Langwell, Ms. Najee, thank you. We will go off the record, and I will have a recommendation out within what 14 days. Okay.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, folks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.